Well, I'm out here in the windy prairie, tedious prairie flatlands of North Dakota. And actually I'm here where the road ends. You can see the sign behind me, hopefully. Road closed. Anyway, what's going on here is back over this way is where the family farm used to be. All that's left are a bunch of charred trees. I'm going to see if I can walk over there and take a look. And we would be kind of on the middle of the, I guess, the northern edge of my grandma and grandpa's farm. There used to be a bridge over there that's been many times inundated. So because Devil's Lake decided to return to its natural banks, the 400 acres that my grandma and grandpa used to farm here probably has been reduced by at least a third because of the floodwaters. And I'm going to just try and walk over there, see if I can get to the trees without stepping on too many crops and see what's left of, well, what's left of the farm I remember. So a note to self, next time I try and do this, it needs to be in like the spring or the fall when there's not so many tall grasses and weeds. You can kind of see it was almost impassable to get to this point. So right over here, you can see the, we used to call it the coulee when I was a kid and we would come and visit. That coulee was maybe 5 or 10 feet wide, and a lot of times it was ankle deep, maybe knee deep, that sort of thing. This is the, I guess you could say, the farmyard. A couple of my grandma and grandpa's grain silos over there that look like they're about ready to tip into the water. All of this was beautiful mowed yard that I would mow just because it was fun when I was a kid. And these burned trees here used to be what they called a shelter belt. That was the term they used in North Dakota. They basically protected you from the howling winds and the snowstorms. But this is what remains of their house that I remember as a kid. What you're seeing here mostly is the rocks from the root cellar that my great grandpa Haugen built, and then my grandpa Eide added on whole nother kitchen over here. And then over here in the weeds you can see the laundry sink is downstairs. And then right here, this little concrete mound, this actually was the cistern where the rainwater would collect, and it was one of the sources of water that my grandparents would use for their house. So I'm standing basically in what was their bedroom, looking out over, in their day, it would have been wide open, the road that you could see any car approaching, and all the trees to the left and to the right that are gone. So, I hate to say it, but it feels kind of dead, and whatever spirits were here, I think, have departed. So this particular spot here, on the northern edge of my grandparents' yard, just outside the shelter belt, was my favorite place in the whole world when I was 8, 10, 12. Because I used to come here and I'd fly kites, and they would go a long way up. It was old school, you know, paper and sticks and string, no high-tech stuff. And they would go way off in the distance, but this is where I would stand for hours and hours and hours and just enjoying the breeze as it is today from behind me. And just watching my kite fly. So I'm visiting a little town called Minnewaukan. It's actually where my grandparents, Art and Beata Eide, that's on my mom's side, where they retired to after they sold the farm to my uncle Gordon. And they lived there for, I think, 20 or so years. Nice little town. However, when I was a kid, my grandpa would take me to this one spot and say how when he was a kid, so that would have been in the 19-teens, maybe, because he was born in 1903, so even up into 1920 or so, he said how in Minnewaukan there was a ferry boat called the Mini H, a steamboat that would come from Devil's Lake further to the east over to Minnewaukan and drop off lumber and supplies and whatever else. It was faster than using you know, wagons or sometimes a railroad even. But anyway, and he would tell me how the Mini H, the steamboat, would come right up to the dock in Minnewaukan and unload. And I thought he was just pulling my leg, because we looked out, or I looked out, and there was nothing but farmland as far as I could see. Well, here's the view now from Minnewaukan. A couple of decades ago, when Devil's Lake decided it was going to return to its normal levels, apparently it decided to flood, I don't know, maybe a third or so of Minnewaukan. They had to relocate a lot of buildings. I know my grandparents' church got moved, literally. Yeah, so he wasn't fibbing. He was telling me the truth. And 100-some years ago, Devil's Lake was what it is now, again. And there was a period of time, I guess 70 or 80 years or so, where there was nothing but lush green farmland in between for about 20-some miles, and all that is inundated. Anyway, just one of those little facts, kind of a fond memory I have of my grandpa, and like I say, just figured he was fooling me. Well, this is my final stop on the Dead Relatives Day, the Dia de los Parientes Muertos, and I'm here at Antiochia Church. I suppose technically it's in the town of Churches Ferry, I think. And line of sight wise, it's probably only 3 miles from where my grandparents' farm was. And the first relatives here are Gilbert and Bertha Haugen. Gilbert would have been, or was, my great-great-grandpa on my maternal side. So from my progeny, that would be their great-great-great-grandpa. And I still have memories of him, but not very many, unfortunately. What I do know is that this beautiful pine tree that looks like it's been topped at some point, Gilbert planted for his first wife Bertha, and it has obviously been growing since 1948. Fairly substantial. So before I get to my grandpa and grandma Art and Beata, there's Rachel, who was my grandpa Arthurides' mom. Rasmus wasn't his biological father. He adopted him and gave him the ID name. But it turns out, well, Rachel was Rasmus's second wife, and it turns out when my grandparents Arthur and Beata were planning to come visit us in Panama in 1972, my grandpa was having a heck of a time getting a passport because his birth records were not jiving up, because he was actually illegitimate, and the father was basically Raquel was an indentured servant for a family out in Montana. The son of the family got her pregnant, on and on. They actually paid child support for a number of years. So we have a Danish line, I guess you could say, that was introduced there. And I have to be honest, one of the things that it was actually a very great relief to me when I learned in 72 or 74, it was after all of the hassle my grandpa went through to get a passport to travel to Panama, that to come to find out that all of his half brothers and sisters, who I'm gonna say were just really strange, some mental illness, some real issues, it was actually a great relief to know I wasn't related to him. And I'm not being snarky, but it was just one of those, it's like, oh, thank goodness. I have some really nice, normal DNA lineage that's not got crazy in it. So that was actually a relief. And I know that Rasmus, you know, treated my dad as if he was his own son. Excuse me, my grandpa, as if he was his own son, which was great. So lineage-wise, it's not a full direct line there, but for Rachel at least, that would be my I'm getting confused, great-great-grandma. So, or no, my great-grandma, my kid's great-great-grandma. Anyway, it's just kind of one of those side stories that you learn, you forget about, and then you realize some days, oh, that's right, we do have a quirk in our family. It's not a bad thing, just is what it is. So the very last of the relatives that I wanted to visit was my grandpa Arthur and grandma Beata, Heidi. Theirs was the farm that, well, what was left of it that we were looking at visiting not too long ago in this video. And I will just say, I have so many stories about both of them. They were wonderful people, great grandparents. My grandpa truly was one of my heroes. You know, what can you say? He was like the best grandpa ever. Taught me how to drive a 3-on-the-tree farm truck. Let me drive his tractor. Went fishing with him all the time when we were here visiting. He was just a really good, solid man and a very kind, thoughtful person to Beata, to my grandma. And Beata and Arthur's daughter, Bernice, my mom, married Dave Bagleen, so we saw the Bagleen relatives earlier. And Beata's father and mother were the ones we just saw, the Haugans. So everyone's, I don't know, I guess kind of an origin story for as long as they were in the country, not too far from where they started. And you can't really see it, but over on the horizon, maybe 2 miles away, is the farm that I was showing you, where Haugans originally started that farm, and then Art and Beata took it over. So they never strayed too far from home, although they did come visit us in Panama one year. I think it was 1972. Art and Beata had a son, David, that only lived to be 2.5. And this was back in a period of time, of course, when it wasn't taken for granted that all your children would survive. And it was just I think it was a heart-rending thing that I know my grandma never fully recovered or got over it. I know my grandpa always grieved. And so here he is with them. And I think it's just kind of a nice way to close. Just enjoy some of the wind here in North Dakota in the trees.